Hey, how's everybody doing today? Pretty close on this restoration here. It's the fourth day. Pretty much all cables are hooked up where we left off. I went ahead and installed the headset and hooked up all the wiring. So I'll go ahead and show you what I've done under here. So basically, I'm going to push, right now I have the speedometer cable hooked up, but if you're ever taking apart one of these headsets and not familiar, you actually disconnect, or I mean, you can actually leave the speedometer cable hooked up, but you need to push the speedometer cable up and kind of lift the lift as you push up here.
All right, as you can see, Robot's already disconnected the speedometer cable. Robot, point to the speedometer cable.
Right here. And it's basically, you see all the wiring's been hooked up. One thing that kind of drives me nuts is when these things are like barely, the cover barely fits and just the wiring's a mess under here. It only takes a little bit extra effort to route the wiring correctly. As you see, this speedometer bracket actually still has a little plastic tabs that actually hold the wiring underneath. And this is the main wiring harness from the frame. Actually, I have it routed under this right side. The wiring from your left-hand brake switch, which is the headlight, the power for the headlight comes through this left-hand side here. And you can see it goes to that's actually the high beam telltale indicator. There's these two grounds that are critical at the speedometer. If they're loose, sometimes you need to put new terminals on the connectors. Speedometer lights hooked up, neutral lights hooked up, even though we don't have a neutral switch. I've done a couple extra things, added little zip ties, and some of the wires were a little short on this new replacement harness, so you could actually see the heat shrink tubing on this green, red, and this black wire right here. I actually extended them, so you kind of get a little bit more room to route those wires in. And basically, the green and black, can go either these positions is diagonal here, and then your red and white go on those two there. The later P200s, sold in America, 1980, 81, they have a couple extra terminals and some gray wires that are actually, you could turn on the tail light in a third position on the key. This one's much simpler, whatever you want to call it, the 78 through 79 style. But pretty much that kind of sums up hooking up the wiring under here. This is your front brake switch. We don't have the front brake switch on here. The wiring to the front brake switch, actually just put heat shrink over them so the cable doesn't have the inline brake switch on it. One other thing with the headlight, this is actually the original style seal beam headlight. To route the wiring through this handlebar tube, you actually need to take the terminals out of the connector block, and there's like little tabs that you can use a small screwdriver to pop these terminals out, but you can see actually the positions that the wire colors hook up. Basically, black's on your left, that's your ground. The top one's your low beam, and your high beam's on the right here, which is the green wire. It's got two wires because the other wire goes to your indicator lamp there.
So that's kind of the cheat sheet. You'll notice when you go to buy headlights anymore, these seal beam ones are no longer available, and there's a variety of different bulb holders and different connecting styles. But the key thing to remember is, I guess, just those color configurations. That's pretty standard on all the P series as far as what's ground, what's high, what's low. But that's what an original headlight looked like. And same thing goes for, this is pretty tidy wiring as far as this is what it would have looked like literally from the factory, 1977, 78, 79. And Robot was saying that this is a simpler wiring or electrical system, and you'll notice too that ignition switch there, that's the one that just basically has the two position and spots to hook up 4 wires.
Here, actually see it function right here. Oops.
A little sticky to be expected. But yeah, the later ones are the ones that have the bigger switch that has the parking light indicator, but that's the function of the switch there. So now when we go to reinstall this thing, Robot would gently and carefully attach the speedometer cable. He'd make sure that ring nut doesn't fall down the speedometer cable into the steering tube. And you'll see he'll get that installed, and you kind of gently with both hands, you're going to have your left hand up on the top, and your right hand's going to go back down to the speedometer cable. And you're going to kind of pull that speedometer cable.
And just keep an eye on your wiring, make sure nothing's getting pinched. I already had this fit, so it should go pretty smoothly.
So you see him kind of pulling the slack of the cable down, and that's seating the headset top up there. It's actually looking pretty good, and by the time you start to install those 4 screws that are 5mm by 35mm in length, the Phillips head fasteners, there's 4 on the underside. It'll basically pull the whole headset top down.
They all have a wave washer on them, actually. Kind of helps put a little extra tension because you don't want to crank on these screws all that tight. And one key with these screws is just get them all started. You know, don't go ahead and crank down.
You notice he's kind of pivoting the handlebars back and forth to make it as easy as possible to work on it. Left hand is kind of pulling down on it. You can feel when they catch cleanly. And again, the headset top is a commonly replaced item when you're doing a restoration or anything like that. And mostly because of the way those threaded bosses kind of get messed up. When I'm talking about the threaded bosses, we're talking about, you know, the female threads that those screws are threading into.
And sometimes if you're struggling with one of the screws, you may want to check your wiring or control cables. You know, make sure that they're not in the way, because I'm actually struggling with catching that one.
Notice too, we've still got the glove box off. Just makes it a little bit easier. So like that robot can have that nice Phillips screwdriver, and he's not kind of fighting the glove box at all.
All right, I'll show you some of the things I did to the cowl. It's pretty simple to build these cowls. The turn signal wiring is kind of the tricky part. They actually have a little contact here that the contact actually with the wire drops in from this direction and pulls through. And as you can see, there's these little clips under here that actually hold the wiring in place. That goes all the way around here. And underneath this is a little terminal block that will actually tie this little wire that goes to your turn signal to this little wiring harness here. There's a little slack. I actually put a little zip tie right there. The critical thing is the grounding on these turn signals. It actually makes a ground connection at that screw right there. And the paint's really thin. I scraped it a little bit underneath that nut. And in addition to the nut, there's actually a star locking washer. And that kind of bites into the metal to make a good ground. I actually use a star locking washer on both of these M4 screws. But this one in the rear is the one that actually makes the ground connection. The little rubber, whatever you call it, little tubing piece that's on the cowl peg.
Part number on the cowl peg is 024041. Those are kind of critical, and they're always missing.
Put the cowl rubber on. This is the cowl rubber that's included with the rubber kit. Put a pop rivet right through here. There's a little hole that actually just holds the rear of the rubber in. And you need to make a little slit on this side for the peg to pop through. Pretty simple, pretty much. Kind of want to test to make sure the turn signal works. As you can see on this side, the ground's been ground away. I think we showed that in one of the first steps after paint. You grind away the paint to expose that little copper pad or brass pad.
And that's how the cowl itself is going to be grounded to the rest of the frame, to that little copper contact right there.
But oftentimes, before I even install the cowl, I'll put 12 volts between the ground here and that peg, make sure the light comes on. I mean, it could be a combination of problems. It could be the ground, it could be the bulb socket, especially if they're used turn signals. You know, you may just need to mess with them. It's best to test it right here before you go ahead and put it on the actual scooter.
And then as far as the scooter, like Robot will show now where the actual contact is for the turn signal, like where power, let's see this thing will focus, there we go.
And that's the actual contact right there. I replaced them. This is a newer replacement part from a PX. The actual hole's a little bit larger diameter, so you actually have to open out the hole to fit those new replacement parts. The cowl hook, just polished it up a little bit and put it in there, and there's actually a ground connection underneath the tank that ties to that cowl hook from the wiring harness.
And then to install that, you know, we can show you off, that would pull out Oops, pull out and turn
Yeah.
to latch in place.
And sometimes these little rubber peg hooks, sometimes they kind of want to stay with the hook, unfortunately. The original ones were a little bit harder plastic. The replacement ones are a little softer. But that's just kind of the way it goes with those. You can glue it in place if you like. Batteries all installed. All the wiring, actually, it's all been tested and works. Tail light comes on, brake light works, horn honk. Actually, I'll turn the turn signal on, and I'm going to put this cowl on. We'll see if our rear turn signal works right here. So basically, any of these vintage Vespas, hook it in there. A little hook right here hooks onto that plate right there. And you can see I'm kind of putting some pressure towards the back as I'm sliding down this front here.
There you go. Notice as soon as that front pin pushed in and it made contact and he hooked the ground strap up, voila. We've got grounding, functioning turn signal. Notice there's the new P200 badge. That's just held on with a couple clips, pretty simple to install.
So I got the tank all assembled. A couple special tools you'll need to actually build or put the fuel tap in, and you'll need a couple extensions to actually put this little banjo bolt. There's actually a nut sitting at the very bottom of this tube here for the oil tank. And as you can see, there's the fuel rods in there. And it's the standard European style, not the one that comes on some of the American ones. It's got the regular lever, and we're actually putting the actual plate that covers up the American lever hole. And in here you can see the fuel tap. Basically there's a nut, a large nut that you pretty much kind of drop over the vent tube. You know, take care not to damage that vent tube, because if that vent tube comes loose out of the fuel tap body, you end up with a fuel tap that leaks. Basically get everything set. You use this crow's foot fuel tap tool to tighten the nut in there.
Little tip, it's generally easier to actually put the fuel tap in before you put the oil tank on. That's what Robot has done during the course of assembly, but just kind of speeding forward, we're showing it already all assembled. But so I've put the fuel tap in first.
Rubber grommet, or the rubber gaskets there. This compression nut tightens down on the tank, and there's also a rubber gasket in there. And one thing about this tank, I actually don't tighten the nut that holds this banjo bolt all the way tight at first. This is the kind of setup you'll need. 17mm deep socket.
Hold on, hold that. So it's got 17mm deep on a really long extension or a couple long extensions pieced together.
And basically go right all the way down there. You can tighten or loosen the oil tank, a banjo bolt.
You kind of want to leave that loose so you can kind of play around with positioning the angle of the oil tank so it pokes through the frame really nicely. Go ahead and hold that up to me, Robot, just like that.
You can see the kind of a guide to kind of line it up roughly is just look through this hole straight at it, and you'll see the sight glass, you know, kind of perfectly centered with this hole right here.
Got it. So it's not quite at 12 o'clock, it's at like 12:05.
Something like that, yeah.
Just
it's not
barely clocked a little bit
yeah.
to that direction.
Oil lines on there. This is a oil-resistant Tygon replacement oil line. And we actually use these clips here, these hose clips.
Much like the original ones.
Yeah, much better. Don't put a regular worm gear hose clamp on something this small. It's actually going to end up leaking if you do so. There's actually a gasket between here and this metal washer. Again. New oil tank, new sight glass. A lot of times if you have the original oil tank, it's going to have little stress cracks in it. Good idea just to change it out now. Make sure the sight glass is tight. Don't want to over tighten, that will easily crack. See on this side, got the fuel lid in. Originally they had a pin going through here, but you could actually replace it with a cotter pin. It's a little easier to install. And same with the little tie rod and the nut right there. Fuel tap gasket, 002319, kind of sets right in there.
A lot of times we'll kind of pack both sides of that with grease. It'll kind of help hold it in place. It'll act as a tiny bit of a buffer to keep the ethanol or whatever additives in the gas that cause those things to expand rapidly. Probably the most common spare part in the vintage Vespa world is that gas cap rubber gasket right there. The robot's taking the time to kind of carefully align everything, and he's going to show you right now just how easily this thing is going to drop in the frame. And you want to go through the effort of dropping the thing in and out of the frame a couple times, make sure it's nice and easy before you actually hook the lines up, so you're not fighting the lines, just to make sure that the tank fits in there really cleanly.
And rubber gaskets in here actually in place. And you can see there's these little notch here.
We zoom in on the notches.
Those actually line up with the seams in the center of the Vespa frame here.
Part number on that gasket is a 159804. So that's the tank to frame body gasket. All right, robot, you ready to count down to?
So pretty much ready to drop it in. I usually, right now it's at the closed position. I'll turn it, you know, kind of whatever you call that.
It's kind of halfway between closed and on.
So it's just, that's kind of, I don't know, for me it's the easiest position to get it in. We ran the fuel line in an earlier step. I'm gonna actually hook that up. And again, I'm gonna use the same kind of,
and again, like we said earlier, it's like the fuel line still isn't hooked up at the carburetor end. It's nice so you can actually kind of pull the slack back and forth. And robot's using one of the proper hose clips on that. There's a special pliers that you can kind of purchase, not from Scooter West, but you can kind of purchase from any of the tool trucks or auto supply places. But those are the special crimping pliers for this style of hose clamp.
and take care not to, if you are gonna rest the tank, you know, on the side of the frame, the new restoration, you may wanna put some rags down just to kind of, so you're not rubbing metal parts that are freshly painted together here. Get it right there. Still supporting the tank. Feed the oil line through. And you can see the fuel line kind of is coming off to the left of this oil tank. Right there, it's kind of all ready to go. And basically, as I'm dropping the tank in there, you can actually kind of, you know, keep that the fuel lever kind of centered, and actually kind of grab it right through the hole there. And you'll see, I'm kind of dropping the front of the tank down first, and then the rear drops in. And actually, the grommet's already in place, and that kind of protects that sight glass from damage, from rubbing up against the metal frame when you're dropping it in. Fuel lines, it's a little bit longer you need. So I'll go ahead and pull out most of the slack. You can see I kind of have a little bit more than I need, maybe an inch. You don't want to have it too tight, so I actually push it down just a little bit, because as the motor compresses, it needs this extra slack down here. So I'll probably cut maybe an inch off that. Oil line right there. We'll go ahead and fill the oil tank right now, actually.
So robot's gone ahead and dumped a good bottle of decent quality two-stroke oil. Get a little shout out from Motul, face that label out. And he's basically held the oil line down to basically let the oil line self-prime. You can see the green oil, and he's got his finger over that hole. He's basically letting all the air come out and be full of solid oil.
I'll just leave one little bubble. See that little bubble that's actually traveling up right now?
Point to that, this little guy right
It's
there.
that little bubble, it's actually almost right, it's right below the clip right now. I just want to have that little bubble in there. And that's just the telltale when I actually start the scooter to verify that the oil pump's going to be working. You see the bubble right there.
Let me see that bubble.
That's the whole reason you want to use a clear line here, so you could actually verify the oil is actually pumping. And I'll go ahead and feed that oil line on. And
So yeah, the test for this, we'll show it to you later, but essentially with that bubble there, as the motor is running and as you accelerate the bike, you should see that oil get sucked back in towards the oil feeding tube, into the oil pump, and eventually works its way into the carburetor. So robot's already cut that inch and a half off the fuel line. He's going to crack open that banjo so we can position that in the correct downward position. We'll install the fuel line, tighten up the banjo, we'll put some gas in it and make sure it doesn't leak, and then we'll check back in. Anything else, Robot?
Usually I'll install this banjo. I'll actually just take it all the way off the carb, and I'll use a worm gear clamp on this side. Just a little easier to use, you know, versus putting the gapless clamps that I normally use. All right, so I put a little bit of fuel in the fuel tank. Fuel line's all hooked up, of course. And I'll actually crack the banjo just to verify fuel flow. And you can kind of see it weeping out. The tank's not too full, but you can see it's gushing out actually underneath the motor, because actually the mixture plug on the back of the air box isn't in, so it's just running right out of there. And that's definitely flowing good enough to fill the carburetor bowl. Just to verify, sometimes you end up with a pinched fuel line or a fuel tap that doesn't work right.
Or even a fuel line that's still too long at this point. And it's also nice too, because you can actually tighten that banjo bolt, and we've got these nice wrenches. Notice it's slotted or hex head. Always try and use hex head whenever possible. But you're also able to tighten that thing down just enough to watch the fuel stop weeping out around the gaskets. Common that we see all those fittings and stuff significantly over tightened, and you don't want to start doing that. Want to double check the tightening of the little oil feeder tube. And in theory, we're pretty much ready at this point to install the air bellow. It's definitely a little tricky to do these. Robot's going to show you the best way.
Kind of sticking my hand in there. There's this little tab that actually lines up with that little notch there. And I'll kind of start with the tab. I have my thumb in there, and I'm actually pulling the back of the air bellow kind of around this lip here. And you just kind of work it all the way around. I see plenty of times where it's like somebody got it on the top and then they were too lazy to actually get it on the bottom. So right there, it's actually on there all the way. And then to do the air box side, obviously air filter, nothing's in the way. And you just use like one of your fingers to kind of work the rubber around the lip, you know, and it doesn't use any type of tie wrap or anything. It just relies on the rubber going over this little aluminum lip of the air box. And again, it's easy to miss underneath because you can't see what's going on really all that well. So kind of just massage it on there. And there we go. It's all the way on, all the way around. Put the air filter on, or you could actually even start the motor at this point.
Let's see if it starts. We've never started this motor. See how it goes. So Robot's pulled the choke out.
Electricity. Let's see how many kicks it's going to take.
Oh.
Headlight works. And you can watch the fuel line, the oil line actually priming right now. The bubble didn't.
That was it. You saw the bubble get sucked into the oil metering tube. Started up about 5 kicks. Pretty good for a bike that motor that's never been run, never been lit off.
I put a little oil actually in the first tank full, especially, you know, since the oil pump is priming. You know, there's no oil getting to the actual engine until it gets all the way through the tube, through the oil pump, and to the carburetor. So actually, there's about 3% oil with the little bit of fuel, like the liter of fuel I have in the tank right now. Go ahead and pop the air filter on. And I have the mixture plug. It's actually not installed on the back because I'll give this thing a couple runs around the block. It's actually set up slightly richer than stock just because I have a Ceto Plus pipe. I think there's a 120 main jet in here.
So Robot's going to install the 2 screws to hold the filter on. Then he's going to throw the airbox cover on. Like he said, he's going to leave the mixture screw open so we can kind of fine tune it as we drive the thing a little bit. But up next, I believe we're actually going to finally going to throw the glove box on. Before we do that, we'll show you how to pre-assemble the glove box and get it ready to install. Nice thing about leaving the glove box off until this point is in the event that you were to drop any tools while working on the handlebars or something like that, it keeps the top of the glove box from getting chipped or messed up or anything. So check back in a sec.
All right, got the glove box all built up. It's actually a little trickier sometimes than it looks. A couple things that you usually need to tweak are these brackets to kind of get them aligned so the door is actually perfectly centered in the actual box itself.
Sorry, turn the door over, rotate it over again. So you can kind of see how clean the line is around the entire opening. Robot's kind of spent some time to make it so. Spent some time making sure the lock works.
It doesn't bind when it opens and closes.
So flip it over, Robot, and show the backside. Show what you have to do kind of to the hinges sometimes.
Sometimes you got to squeeze them. Right now I'm kind of holding the rubber from popping out there, but you know, squeeze them. Sometimes you got to pull them. You got to take extra care not to pull these brackets off the spot welds. As you can see, before this one was painted, it's actually been welded back in place.
What have you used for the hinge pins too?
Just cotter pins. We do actually stock the original pins, but they're pretty difficult to install.
Rotate that a tiny bit, Robot. There you go, that's better. So there you go, you can see the 2 cotter pins there. What Robot's talking about is you actually have to pinch those brackets together sometimes and spread them apart to make it so the glove box door works smoothly.
And other part sometimes that's pretty difficult to get working is actually the latch. And you can see the actual latch actually catches this little edge here, and the lock actually catches that little tongue up there. There's a little bit of grease on the actual latch itself. Actually ground the latch a little bit, you know, on the sides to make it so it slides nice and easy. Sometimes you got to also clean up some of the paint, you know, excess paint in there to make the actual mechanism work correctly.
Go ahead and close it, and let me zoom in and show the operation of it. So what happens is that lock actually pushes down. You see that spring on the back side of it, and the Robot's going to push that lock down. You'll see the whole lock move, and that's actually what releases it. So I'll push it down to close it, and then he'll use the key to operate that other tongue, which locks and secures the glove box. But it's nice, actually. It's obviously impossible to get all this working once the thing's installed. The final thing you want to do on the glove box before you put it on is actually, you got to fight the rubber a little bit. And a little tip on the rubber, as you can kind of see, you cut like a little 45 relief notch where it wraps around all the corners. And a good little tip if you're using new rubber, which we are on this one, this just came out of the bag, so it was all kind of coiled and wound up. But if you take the rubber out and leave it out in the sun, it'll become a little bit more pliable and much easier to use. So you'll see when we go to put this glove box on, Robot and I will both be kind of holding it and making sure the rubber doesn't come off. And one final tip that I've done before is you can actually take like dental floss, and you can actually wrap dental floss around the outside of the glove box. And you can actually wrap dental floss around here and behind the door. Actually with dental floss you can pull it nice and tight, but that'll actually be a bit of a cheater, so it'll keep the rubber from coming off. You can do that down there, you can even do it up top. It's a good little trick if you feel like you're actually fighting the glove box rubber quite a bit. And then once it's all installed, you can just cut your dental floss and pull it out effortlessly. Robot's fondling that spring there. I forget the part number on that, but that's actually pretty cool when you actually see those in there. That's called like the tool roll spring. So it's designed so you can actually hold exactly a tool roll in there. Pretty cool. There you go. Before we actually put the glove box on, we're going to show you the 4 mounting studs and the way we like to do it. So we've got the studs coming through. Point that out, Robot. Oops, sorry. He did the upper ones on me.
Upper ones and the lower 2 right there.
And we've run the fastener through from the front outer leg shield, and then we've run a nut down it. And that nut has basically secured that stud in place. So when we're putting the glove box on, those studs are affixed. And it'll be pretty easy to actually get the glove box all installed and in place. One thing you want to note is up there on the upper wiring, the Robot's playing around, you want to make sure you route that correctly. And the correct routing is the way it's kind of set up now, but this wire goes on top of that, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Goes on top. You want to make sure this doesn't get pinched. And I've seen it pinched where it shorts out the wire. You turn on turn signals, it blows the fuse. Seen that a number of times. Also, there's actually a rubber boot that goes over this that protects these terminals here. Right now I don't have them on there, but I'll go ahead and put those on a little bit later. You see the ground terminals, of course, with the star washers and the metal or the paint ground away. So we know the turnstiles are all working. Again, make sure the turnstiles work before you put the glove box on. Up in this glove box, there's little metal tabs that actually hold the wire, much like the cowl. You know, kind of will hold the wire out of the way. You know, once you get everything all buttoned up and get those little wires right in there.
All right, you see the fasteners we're going to use? We're going to use, 5mm nuts, lock washers, and fender washers. We've got those ready to go, as well as our speed wrench there. So let's put this thing on and see how it goes. Robot's actually getting it started. It's best and easiest to kind of get the two bottom ones aligned first. A lot of times, too, you can even feed the fasteners on there to kind of hold it, and then you can kind of use both hands to kind of get the top squared away. And the whole time you got to be careful with the rubber. So it's a little tricky putting the glove box on, but take your time. You'll get it. It'll look killer. All right, the installation of the glove box went so smoothly we probably could have actually filmed it real time. But what you want to do is kind of get the thing lined up, tighten all the nuts kind of finger tight, and then you kind of adjust the glove box. You can kind of move it up and down ever so slightly. Check the operation of the door as you go, and then just kind of tighten everything in a good sequential pattern. You don't really want to over tighten these. Basically tighten them down until that bracket basically contacts the frame on the upper part, and that's about it. So we've got an 8mm deep socket on a 1/4" drive ratchet. Actually, make it so you can get in there pretty easily. What do you got to add to that, Robot?
Make sure your wires aren't pinched, and then actually just secure them up with those low clips. You can kind of feel your way around up in there and where those little clips are. Pretty easy to do.
So we're pretty much at the point where we're going to throw the seat on it, log some test ride miles, and then pretty much call it a day. Call the customer and let them know it's ready. Should this be our official sign-off, Robot?
Yep, pretty much. Ride around a little bit, just kind of locally, make sure, work out any bugs. Of course, the cables are going to need to be all tightened up just because they kind of tend to slacken up as they're new cables. If it's a new motor, you may want to do a plug chop, check your spark plug, kind of do a higher speed run and then kill the ignition, check your plug. That's, adjust the brakes, kind of just check it out. Obviously be easy on it first couple miles. And that's about it.
Thanks for watching. Hopefully this restoration video of a P-Series bike will be of some use to somebody somewhere in the world. Signing off from Vespa Motorsport, Steve on the camera. That's Robot. 4 nights, chipping away, videotaping the whole thing. Panning in to 11 a.m. Time to clean up and